Tonight we have our last but certainly not least webinar of the Equine Speaker series. We have UMaine Cooperative Extension's very own Nicholas Rowley, who is a sustainable agriculture and horticulture professional based out of our Farmington office. Nick's work focuses on providing technical assistance to farmers, gardeners, and other community members in Franklin County. His work focuses on cover cropping, weed management on vegetable farms, and in forage, compost utilization, reduced tillage, and vegetable variety trials. Nick is an integral member of the Maine compost team, which gives training. And Nick, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it gives training to certify individuals who are responding to disease outbreaks across the country, like such as the high path avian influenza outbreaks that we've had. Um, so without further ado, Nick, I don't know if you'd like to expand on your role with Cooperative Extension briefly, get into it, but I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, and all you folks for logging on tonight. Yeah, can you see everything all right?
Yes.
So I'll expand upon that just slightly. You did a great job. And all that wonderful description you may have heard. My background is really plant science. I'm a plant nerd, plant soil science, and I do a lot with composting and the Maine compost team, like Rachel mentioned. Here is my email if you need it, or my office cell phone. My home turf is Franklin County, but I also cover Somerset County, and I do statewide and some regional national work with composting. And part of that team, we do the Maine Compost School, and we have a couple different programs. So one of them is our carcass management program, where we focus specifically on managing carcasses through compost in some sort of like catastrophic event. So foreign animal diseases, natural disasters like floods, heat waves, barn collapses because of snow, market disruptions because of COVID-19, just a couple examples. And then also we have a different program that is the Maine Compost School. It's been going on for 28, 29 years. So obviously I wasn't there at the beginning, but it's something I inherited with my partners, Mark King from Department of Environmental Protection and Mark Hedrick from the Department of Ag. And that's a 5-day program we offer twice a year, and we cover kind of everything composting. So we touch a little bit on mortality management, but we do a lot of other composting as well. What you should all know about me is that I'm not a veterinarian. I don't work for the state in any regulatory capacity. I don't have all the answers to some of the questions you may ask through this presentation. And truthfully, everybody here tonight knows more about horses than I do. But I want to start off with saying horse owners care about their animals, right? And that's something you don't need me to tell you, I'm sure. You know, we as a species have a long-standing relationship with horses, and that includes everything from working them, transportation, therapy and healing, sporting, recreation, and other sorts of cultural importance, right? Um, so they are your or our animals, they're our pets, they're our friends, and they're family. And unfortunately, there comes a time when we have to manage them after life, right? And the old saying we have in the composting school is if you're going to have livestock, you're going to have dead stock. And it's just kind of a fact of dealing with animals, even though it's not a very fun one to deal with. And when you have a large animal as a horse, what do you do with that carcass after that animal is deceased, right? So we've suffered a loss, and then now what? What are the next steps in moving on? So if you look online into the state's kind of guidance for this, which is, I will say, a little confusing to read. If you have questions, you can always reach out to specifically Mark Hedrick with the Department of Ag, since he oversees this. but I'm happy to take questions and help you along as far as I can. And what you'll notice is that there's a real difference between routine and catastrophic mortality, right? And so routine, it's exactly like it sounds. It's just normal death. On any sort of livestock farm, you're going to have or you might have daily mortality. You're going to lose a heifer, or in this case, a horse, at some point, right? And then catastrophic mortality is, like I mentioned before, some sort of foreign animal disease, natural disaster, etc. And the rules for dealing with these carcasses or this dead stock change depending on kind of which category you fit in. And so today we're really going to be talking about routine mortality on the farm. And so we have a few considerations that we need to take into account for. One is the costs. What is it going to cost to essentially take care of this carcass? Environmental protection. So, what can we do to say negate or mitigate any potential environmental issue, such as like leaching from the animal nutrient leaching? And then practicality. How easy is this going to be for you to do? This is probably going to be a difficult time. So can we make this as easy as possible and prepare you for it ahead of time? And then, of course, regulations, right? And so that's the state has guidance on this, and regulations, zoning, and things like that. So I can't see the text chat box. Let me pop it up. But I have a question for you all. There we go. So the first question is, can I deposit dead livestock in the woods in Maine? And let me just say, I'm in no regulatory fashion, right? So there's no wrong answer here.
And folks, I don't know if the chat button is working for you. You can go ahead and type a response in the Q&A.
Oh, is there a separate Q&A?
Yeah, I don't know if
Oh, I got you. I got it now. Sorry.
Nick, can you see what's in the Q&A?
I can now. Yeah, foolishly had the wrong box open. So yeah, we had one person respond, yes. And that is true. You can. Let me. However, it's discouraged by the state, and some would say strongly discouraged, and that's because it attracts vectors, potential pollutions, and health issues. But it is not necessarily illegal on a small home scale in the state of Maine. Some states have it banned outright, but here, not necessarily illegal. In fact, on my father-in-law used to own a dairy farm. There's a piece of his property to this day we refer to as the dead cows, because that's where they used to drag all the dead cows in the 60s and 70s, 80s, and you can still find bones down there. And there are laws against depositing the livestock where it will become a nuisance. So if you are depositing, and I would say those are probably more likely to be on near property boundaries where they're going to cause an issue either through vector activity, so that's like scavenging animals, or odors, things like that. There can be fines if it is a nuisance, and then mandatory removal and disposing or taking care of that animal in some other way. All right. Thank you all for the participation. I have another question for you. Oops. Hopefully you didn't see that. I'm trying to get the Q&A box back up. Okay. So can I bury my deceased horse?
Once again,
Anybody?
folks, we don't have a chat, so Q&A is probably the best bet to use.
All right. Elizabeth came in with the answer again. And yes, you are correct. Okay. It's probably one of the most common methods. This image here is just a design because I didn't want to show you an animal in a hole. But it's exactly like it sounds, right? You excavate a hole, you place the animal in it, and then you take the excavated soil and put it back over the animal and then seed the area. It would be recommended to prevent any sort of erosion. In Maine, small volumes are exempt for some regulations, so that would be any small farm. And so uh, that would be one large animal per year. So that's like around 1,000 pounds, two medium animals per year. So somewhere around 500 pounds each, or less than 500 pounds of animal carcasses or offal, right? So intestines and things like that. If you're doing any sort of butchering or, 500 pounds of animal carcass with chickens. If you go over that, then you kind of get moved into a different category, and you're supposed to have a site evaluation, some sort of management plan in place. But for small volumes, that is okay to do on your property. And that same rule applies to composting. So we'll talk a little bit about composting later on. And so we just have some advantages and some disadvantages. So it's on farm, which is nice. It's easy to implement if you have the equipment. Very familiar to most people. It's how we bury our dead, right? Or take care of our dead through burial. Um, Here it says public health risks, biosecurity risks, and pathogens may survive. That's more on a catastrophic event. There is some research saying that like the pathogens can leach out of burial areas into the waterways and potentially be taken up downstream. On a home scale, probably less of an issue. It is viewed as not sustainable, and really that's because when you put an animal in the ground, if you bury it too deep, it becomes an anaerobic environment, and so the carcass doesn't really break down. It can stay for quite a while. Also, in an anaerobic environment, you're going to be creating methane rather than CO2, which is a much stronger greenhouse gas. Some say it limits future land use because you now have, an animal in the ground there. It could require heavy equipment. A lot of farms have tractors or possibly backhoes or small excavators, or you could rent it, or really excessive labor. What's nice is it's fast and it's low cost. And yeah, it's definitely viable for small numbers. Now, I think the next one is a pretty fun question. Well, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. So, can I personally cremate my animal by burning? And if you want to put that in the Q&A, I'll just give it another moment. All right. Well, let me tell you. Oh, awesome, Elizabeth. That's a good answer to a kind of a tricky question. So let's go over it. Thank you. Um, so at first I'll say no, not likely allowed in a routine situation. And I'm saying that because if you were to go and say, I'm going to build a pyre, like a big pile of wood, and then burn my animal on top of it, that would not be allowed, right? So they are permitted in the state, but only in extreme emergencies. And then that would have to have prior approval from the commissioner. So burning in that pyre sort of system would not would most likely not be allowed for this routine mortality. And one of the reasons is there are a lot of concerns with airborne particulates when burning. Also, you know, carcasses have a lot of water in them. So typically you need a lot of accelerants to get them going, from what I've read. And the spillage of the accelerants on the ground, it can be seen as an issue. However, there are other high temperature or like combustion methods. Some of these are. So there are possibly like incineration facilities, air curtain incinerators, which is right here, gasification, pyrolysis. They can all be used for routine mortality management, but it's not really practical for you as a small farm owner to have this on your farm, right? So delivery to a facility that can accept a livestock carcass and take care of it through high temperature means. Does anybody here have experience getting a large animal incinerated? I'm not really aware of any, except for I think Maine, which may be able to take livestock. Yeah, yeah, I'm not aware of any either. So it is an option, but I don't know if it's an option for us here in the state of Maine, or at least a practical option for us here in the state of Maine. I think Maine's in southern Maine, Wyndham area. Um, okay, and then we also have rendering. And rendering is still a good option, uh, but really only for areas that are serviced by a rendering company. To my knowledge, the closest rendering place is in southern Massachusetts, like central southern Massachusetts, kind of close to the Connecticut border. Um, and I I'm not sure on their willingness to accept animal carcasses. I do know they like render a lot of like expired meat products from grocery stores. So if any of you have um used that facility, I'd be interested to hear how that was or if it is even a possibility. Outside of that, I believe there's some in New York and beyond. So it's rendering's a nice option because it can be recycled into something. But the cost of transport and perhaps the acceptance of material from so far away makes it kind of an un or non-practical option for our small farms here in the state. Um, and then here it says new regulations on products have caused renderers to be more selective in the material they accept. And I think that's for cattle, specifically specified risk material. And I can't remember the disease that's for. But anywho, viable option if you have it close to you. And then what about euthanasia drugs? Sodium pentobarbital, barbital, xylazine, et cetera. Um, the American Veterinary Medical Association, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, um, recommends instant burial or incineration when an animal is euthanized using one of these substances. And in their recommendations, they really question composting. They don't say they pretty much say there's not enough research out there, and that's true. That's true. And the issues are potential poison for scavenging wildlife or scavenging pets. Um, there are very few composting studies. There is a relatively new one that was done in Minnesota. Um, they were looking at sodium pentobarbital, and in their one study, they saw a significant reduction in this drug throughout the composting process. Not a complete reduction, but that's only one study. There before I joined the Maine compost team, they had done some, I would say, quasi studies, so unpublished research, looking at sodium pentobarbital and xylazine, I believe, and they found similar findings, although I don't think their reduction was as high as this. I thought it was somewhere in the 80s. And so, with that being said, for homeowners, I feel like composting may be risky if you are using these drugs. Um, because if you're not an experienced composter, then you may not get the compost. You may not be able to build the compost right the first time and get the temperatures you need to degrade the animal quickly. So then it's not, I guess, a lure for wildlife to come in or pet. So, anyways, like I mentioned before, my background is really composting, so I'm going to talk a lot about that now. Um, Composting can provide a sustainable management tool for livestock disposal. And what's nice is it allows for year-round, um, yeah, economically and environmentally sustainable management of farm mortalities. This picture right here is one of our compost piles. This is actually chickens inside here. You can see the microbial activity working. That's all this steam, this water blowing off from our compost pile. This is at our research facility in Monmouth, the Highmore Farm. So, question is really, what is composting? And you could probably put a lot of different definitions to it. I won't make you try to type that in the Q&A box, but the EPA definition I like. It's the controlled aerobic process that converts organic materials into a nutrient-rich, biologically stable soil amendment or mulch through natural decomposition. And the end product of composting is compost. And there's two words that I think are really important to highlight, and that's controlled and aerobic, right? So in a composting situation, we are manipulating the environment for these microorganisms to essentially facilitate decomposition. And we want it to be aerobic. So these microbes um, need air, essentially. And if it goes the other direction, anaerobic, that's when we get a lot of problems. We get leachate issues. We get, so that's like nutrients leaving, possibly foodborne pathogens. Um, we get bad odors, and we often get vectors in that. And so with composting, microbes break down this organic matter naturally, and the majority of the microbes are bacteria. So 90% of the microbes, and there's billions and billions of them, right? Majority of them are bacteria. The rest are fungi, actinomycetes, which is this white ashy stuff you're seeing here. That's a fungi-like bacteria called actinomycetes, however you want to say it. And so those three do the majority, and then there's like protozoas, rotifers, macroinvertebrates. It's a whole ecosystem of little bugs that we're really working with. And really composting, what we're doing is we're providing the ideal conditions for them to thrive, and thereby we accelerate this process. So we're controlling it to promote it. And so when you break it down simply, we have raw organic materials, and with a carcass compost, that's going to be your carcass, right? Your dead stock. It's going to be your carbon and whatever nitrogen source that you're putting in. You're going to have moisture, and you're going to need oxygen to facilitate those microbes. And then kind of on the other end, you blow off carbon dioxide, water as steam. The microbes generate heat as they're decomposing. And then at the end, you end up with compost. And some people like to say humus. And really, what we're saying here is we're created an organic material that is going to resist significant further decomposition. So, what we want to do is create and maintain these communities of microbes. Um, I think one of my colleagues said it best is that you kind of treat these microbes like your little pets, right? You're giving them the food, the water, the air, the housing that they need. to do their work. So in a sense, we're farming these microbes to do this work for us. And we must have the proper mixture of ingredients, and we refer to that as the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If any of you have done any backyard composting, you may have heard of browns to greens, and the browns would be the carbon, the greens would be the nitrogen. And then we also, again, have to consider the moisture of the pile. We don't want it too wet. We don't want it too dry. Oxygen, we talked about the temperature, pH, possibly other factors like structure. So if it's done right, it's environmentally sound. If it's done wrong, then it's not. So this is where you have to be trained to do it. And so here is this was a large, this is a catastrophic event, and these are obviously eggs. So this was during HPAI outbreak, and these windrows are 700 feet long. There's multiple windrows. There's 500,000 eggs right here. And so the USDA has moved into using this practice because it is so environmentally sustainable. We can create this organic material, this compost, right? And then it can be land applied and just goes away. We can neutralize viruses. We can get rid of a large number of animals, and we can kind of recycle that back into the soil. In a well-constructed pile, leachate is captured, odors will be minimal, and vectors are minimal. So what about doing it in the winter? A compost pile that is big enough to decompose a horse should heat through the winter with no problem if it has been built well. Here, this is a picture I took. It's really blurry because I was out in Michigan. This was another catastrophic event. I'm head to toe in PPE, and so is my phone. So my phone is in a plastic bag. It's like -3 degrees out here, and this pile is 131 degrees Fahrenheit inside of it. What we tell people is the minimum requirement is about 1 cubic yard of material to heat enough to go through the winter. More is a little better if it's really cold. With a horse, even a small horse like a pony, what's that, like 600 pounds, 700 pounds? I told you I don't know much about horses. You're going to have enough material that you'll be way over 1 cubic yard of material to cover an animal that size. And then are compost piles affected by the environment? Absolutely, right? So if the pile's too small or too porous and it's too cold, we're going to just lose the heat. We're going to have no insulative property. If it rains a lot, our temperatures are going to drop. But usually, if the pile is built well, it is resilient. It buffers those environmental factors. And if it can't completely buffer them, it will tend to bounce back. Another thing I should mention is it can be easier to build a compost pile in the winter rather than dig a hole in frozen ground, depending on what type of equipment you have and how deep the frost is. What are the costs with composting? Truthfully, they're going to be higher than burial. You're going to need extra material, but you may have that on your farm already. It's going to be different for everybody depending on what they have on hand. So that could be equipment, that's to move the carcasses, that's to move what we'd call the feedstock. So like here you can see sawdust. This is probably waste feed. That looks like cow manure. So to move all this material to build these piles, it doesn't completely tie up the land forever, but you're going to need space to do it and space to move the equipment around. It's going to take your time or somebody who works for you's time, and then additional material, and those could be the feedstocks. And you may have some of that on hand if you have a manure pile already, right? So what does a compost pile look like? It's kind of should be this parabolic shape. A carcass compost pile should have a base layer. We recommend 18 to 24 inches thick, and that should be really a porous material. We don't want to be putting leaves or grass on the bottom. We want something that air can get through because we call it the chimney, but in a compost pile, air goes through in here, then kind of works its way up top. It has this chimney effect. So that's how we get it into the middle of the pile. So you have that base, you put your carcass on it, and then you cover it with what we would say core material. And this is where you could be using active compost you have on site, horse manure if you have a horse manure pit, that's perfect for it. Horse manure typically has carbon to nitrogen. Horse manure with the litter in it has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of around 25 or 30 to 1, which is pretty much what we want for composting. And that's why if you have a horse manure pile, when you let it sit, it actually creates like kind of a compost all on its own. You don't really have to do anything in most instances because it's the right ingredient. And so you cover the animal, and you want to make sure you cover it with enough material. With larger animals, when they bloat, they can push off a lot of the feedstock, and then you have to go and recover it. Some people, specifically on ruminants, will puncture the ruminant. So we do this with a utility blade. It's not pleasant. Or, some sort of like sharp implement. With larger animals like a horse, I do know enough that they're not ruminants, but people may cut like down the central midline, and that kind of opens the animal up and theoretically speeds up the decomposition process, but it's not absolutely necessary to do. And I could see somebody having an animal that is a pet or that they treat like a family member having a hard time doing that with horse. In this image, it's recommending a cap that's 18 to 24 inches. That's not necessarily mandatory for a good compost pile. With with a horse, if your core is big enough, you could put like a cap of sawdust or some other wood chips on. It helps. We call it a biofilter, and it helps reduce some of these smells. But really, this image is designed for poultry, so that's why there is that thick layer on top. And so, what I want to do is just warn you that I don't have any pictures of horses, but I have a few pictures of us building a compost pile so you can see it. And I know it's about supper time, so I hope I'm not ruining anybody's dinner. So this is down our research facility. We do these trainings. We get daily mortalities from local farms. We take whatever we can get. So sometimes it's a horse, cows, pigs. We used to get a lot of chickens when Hillendale was in business in Turner. They're closed now. So anywho, we we built this base out here, and right away, in a previous slide, I told you this base should be porous and about 18 to 24 inches thick. When you have a larger animal like a horse, or if you had a draft horse that's over 1,000 pounds, you would want closer to the 24 inches of material, because when you put this animal on it, that material compresses and then you lose your pore space. We're doing this picture right here as a training, so we purposely were building it bad. So we built this base. It's mostly sawdust, and it's probably only 8 inches or so deep. We have this animal on it. Here is another picture. So the pile you saw in the last picture, this is the edge of it here after we've covered that dairy cow. Here is what we're looking for. This is probably closer to 24 inches. So that's quite a bit of material on the bottom. These are straight up wood chips. So often people can get wood chips for free. These are playground chips, so they've been dried. But you can get chips from tree companies, but they have a lot of living tissue in them, so they decompose a little differently too. A lot of cellulose and things like that. So here's 24 inches or so. We have really porous material, and we just place the animals on top of it. It's really that simple. We're using our tractor. And that's just for size. That's about 100 horsepower tractor, and the bucket is about a yard. horse, give or take. So we have an animal on here, and what we're doing right now, we have some old compost, probably mixing horse manure in it, which as horse owners, you probably have access to, and covering that animal up. Here's another image of what that, no, it's a little blurry, I'm sorry, what that looks like. And then we would go back on in this situation and probably put a couple inches of sawdust on it as that um, biofilter cap. An important thing to do, though, going back to these slides, is not to drive on this base. Much like putting the animal on it, driving on it with a large piece of equipment compresses it, so that reduces our airflow. Our airflow drives that composting process. And so here's participants in our class. These are a lot of veterinarians and animal health technicians from the USDA. So we train them, and this is one of those cow carcass piles. And I can't remember how many weeks later, but this is likely about 4 weeks or so later. And you can see there's really not much left here. In fact, this area right here that you can see by Mark's leg here, that is most likely what's left over from the rumen inside that cow. If you were to look closely, there will be bones. There will probably be chunks of skin. Most of the fleshy material at that point is pretty much gone. You will still find it in the pile though, and that's around four weeks or so. And these were static piles, which means we never turned them. We never did any sort of incorporation. And so incorporating them would actually push the process along a little faster. That's a little more oxygen in. It also breaks up that carcass. And so when we reduce the volume and have more surface area, we have more spaces for those microbes to attach to and do their job. This, I just wanted to show you, this is not a large animal. This was a whole pile of chickens, and this is about a week later. And so a week later, we're seeing some feathers and a couple bones here and there. But in another couple weeks, the majority of this will be, of the carcasses within these piles will be completely gone. So if I'm going to do this, what do I need on hand? And a good rule of thumb is you need about 5 to 7 cubic yards of carbon for every 1,000 pounds of animal. And that's really for the core. So if you have a really large, say like draft horse or something, you're going to need a couple extra yards to build that deep base. So having more on hand would probably be better than not having enough. Wood chips. Also, just to note, this is a lot larger than our minimum temperature to heat throughout the winter of the 1 cubic yard. So it should be able to heat fine if this is something you have to do in a colder months. Wood chips ranging from 3/4 of an inch to 2 inches work well. It's okay to have a combination of a mix within there. It's actually a little better. The smaller particle size, the carbon is really energy for the microbes, so the smaller particle size can get chewed up faster. The larger particle size builds structure and has porosity. We don't want to see like 4-inch pieces of boards or cut off ends of 2x4s in there. It's not really going to do anything. So somewhere in this size, give or take, is what we're looking for. Sawdust is going to compact a lot on the base. It's good if you have really wet material to kind of soak things up, but we don't want to block off all that pore space. And then, like I mentioned before, your horse manures, bedding, any feed, spoiled feed or feed you have on hand, say you don't have any need for it anymore. If you have active compost, you can use leaves to some extent, but again, they don't have a lot of structure. You could use grass to some extent or waste hay, but that also doesn't have a lot of structure, so you'd want to be cautious with that. If you are interested, there's a whole document put on by Dr. Bill Seekins, who is retired from the Department of Ag. He is a former Maine compost team member, one of my mentors. I'd be happy to email that to you, email the link for you. Came out in 2011. It's still nationally used as a resource developed right here in our great state. So continuing on with what I need on hand. So again, fresh, dry horse bedding. And here's a pretty easy mixture. So a mixture of waste feed, quarter to a third of the mixed, and one of these manures or beddings, two to third, three quarters of the mix, depending on your proportions, will work well. If you were to use leaves, and this was back when you could get poultry manure really easy, this would probably be caged hen manure. Mixture of fresh fall leaves and poultry manure in a ratio of 10-to-1 leaves to manure. The leaves are really light. The poultry or the cage layer manure is really heavy. Broiler litter would be a little different, has a lot of sawdust and shavings, and it's drier. And again, sawdust works well for the cap or to add to a coarse base to prevent further leachate. So you can sprinkle some sawdust on top of a coarse wood chip base if you have an animal that's it's taken a little bit to take care of and may be leaking on some fluids. Keep in mind that not all feedstocks are created equal. So if you get material that has a lot of like sand or garbage in it, sand can actually completely kill a pile with not that much in it. I can lower the temperatures. And then if you're thinking about like a finished product, then you obviously don't want glass or chunks of tar in it. And down in our compost site, we get it. We get sand, we get chunks of tar, we get Barbie dolls from yard and leaf waste, glass, all sorts of stuff. So how long does this process take? It really depends on how the pile is built. Things will naturally decompose, right? So if any of you have ever taken an animal and stuck it in a manure pile, you're kind of halfway to composting already. You have the ingredients there. You may not have the process, it may not be a controlled process, and it may not be super aerobic, depending on your pile, but it's naturally going to break down. In a static pile, which means that's a pile that we don't turn in any sort of way, 10 to 12 weeks. And then, 3 to 6 months for curing after that. But again, you really need to monitor this as time goes on. Turn piles are typically quicker, but a large animal is difficult to turn, especially early on. So you're going to want to give it some time. The recommendation is to turn after 2 weeks of composting or active composting. So if you have a compost pile that hasn't really been doing anything and you dig in and there's still a horse under there, it's probably not time to turn. I just wanted to show this. I know it's not very likely you would have a $100,000 windrow turner on your farm, but this right here is a large windrow turner. They do make smaller ones. Smaller ones may not be big enough for larger animals, but you can simply just use a bucket. This is really fast and great for large compost piles. This is fine for 10 yards, even more. To skid steer, tractor with a bucket, backhoe. Um, and if you wait long enough and check on that animal and make sure it's dissipating, you should have no problem pulling it up. And I will warn you that you will see chunks of fleshy material, if you're only 2 weeks in, even further after that. We want to monitor temps, and the temps are really our indication of microbial activity, and that microbial activity equals decomposition. So moving on with the temps, we're generally trying to get above 131 degrees Fahrenheit. And I put for a period of time because it kind of depends on what you're doing with the compost pile after. We monitor at 18 inches and 36 inches. And that period of time is 3 to 15 days, depending on the type of system being used. if you're not planning on distributing this compost to anybody else other than yourself, then it doesn't really matter. You just keep checking the pile until that animal is gone and you can do whatever you want with it, land apply it. If you're going to use that carcass compost and sell it to somebody, or I suppose give it to somebody, there are some standards in place. Um, so 3 days of 131 for a static pile, 15 days with 5 days above 131 at these temps for a windrow system. So that would be a larger system that's turned. And that's a state regulation. Also, that follows National Organic Program standards as well. And then I think I mentioned curing can be 3 to 6 months before use. If you're field applying, that's less important. If you're using it for seeding vegetable crops or potting mix, you could do a bioassay. And essentially, there's all these salts and organic acids that can reduce seed germination, starve oxygens. It can starve the oxygen out of roots, so it can negatively affect plants if it's not cured enough. You can do a bioassay. You can try to plant some radishes or beans in it. They come up quick. They're really sensitive. Put 100 or so in, count how many come up. If you got close to the germination rate on the package, your material is probably pretty good. I will say your mortality compost is going to have larger chunks of bones in it, so you're going to have to sift around that. Most of them go away. I'll see skulls, I'll see scapulas. Hopefully, I got that right. Sometimes like part of a femur or like a hip bone, but for the majority of it, it all actually goes away, even with minimal turning, as long as you have enough time. And if you are going to turn with the tractor bucket or something, here are the rules of thumb to use. So turn whenever there is a significant drop in pile temperature from one day to the next with no external cause, with no apparent external cause. So if it rains or if it gets really cold and it's windy and the temperatures drop, give it a day or two and see if it bounces back. If everything's normal and the temperatures are dropping, give it a turn. You'll reintroduce some oxygen into it and you'll break up that particle size. Turn whenever the pile temperature exceeds some threshold. And I didn't mention this earlier, but above 160 degrees, we actually start to see a decline in decomposition because we're essentially we're moving out of the thermophilic range. We're making it so hot that those microbes that we want are actually starting to die off. And so that's a way to cool your pile down. Piles can catch fire. They probably won't here in Maine. We're not in a really arid environment, and it would have to be hotter than 160. And then another rule is turn if the temperature reading this says 1 foot, but that'd be 1 foot or 18-inch depth in the pile is more than 20 degrees different than the 3 foot temperature. So those are all just rules of thumb. On a regular compost pile, some people will say, I'm going to turn once a week. But again, you don't necessarily have to turn, it just speeds up the process. What we want to do is monitor, we want to check the pile for vector activity. We don't want to see this. So you can see this is actually a processor, and they create a really good compost, but sometimes some of their material, the offal gets exposed. You end up with a lot of birds in there. When I was here, there was rats, there was a bunch of kitties. There's raptors up in the trees, there's coyotes coming at night. So there's a lot going on to attract animals, and also the smell here is not pleasant. So on a well-built compost pile, most of the vector activity occurs initially when the pile is heating up. Once it gets to like 131, if you have a pile that's 131 and you dig in and you put your hand in it, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to leave your hand there. Feels great in the winter, but as a coyote or some sort of animal that's digging down, they often stick their nose in there, and one, the ammonia smell, and two, the heat, it tends to drive them away. So once the pile gets going, they'll dig in a little and then it tends not to be an issue. But early on, it can be more of an issue. Uh, and then keep in mind, as that soft tissue on the compost pile decomposes, you can get caving in of the pile and like cracks starting to form. So if you have a bucket just to reshape that pile to create that chimney effect, that would be best. Sometimes you have to put a little more material on it, and that's okay too. If you see any sort of like a leg sticking out, you know, because it stiffens up and pokes out, try to put some more material on it and just cover it up. And I just mentioned this, so it's best to reshape them and reduce that exposed tissue. So then, we have a compost pile. It's it's gonna take several months before it's really ready. What can we do with it? This mortality compost still has agronomic value for field application. But like I mentioned, the large bones are likely to be present. They get really brittle. And so they break down. I've had some people concerned that like the bones will puncture a tractor tire. I have never seen that happen. I've seen antlers puncture a tractor tire, but I've never seen bones from a compost pile puncture a tire. I'm not saying it's never happened, just not in my experience. They get brittle, so when you drive over them, they tend to break. If you're doing any sort of tillage or chiseling in the field, it's going to break down even faster. You can also pick them out of the pile. Sometimes they kind of migrate to the top as you're doing any sort of turning through the curing process. And then how much do I put on? These are real, just broad suggested rates. So for a perennial crop, we would front load a little heavier, 20 to 30 cubic yards per acre. For a row crop or forage, right? So our hay crops, 10 to 20 cubic yards per year per acre. And I will say 10 to 20 cubic yards per acre per year doesn't look like an inch of compost. It's kind of like the analogy we use is sprinkling pepper on your mashed potatoes, right? So it's sprinkled out in the field. You're not covering up the grass or anything like that. Home garden, 6 cubic foot for 1,000 square feet. If you do that math out, it's on the conservative end of this, so that's about 10 cubic yards per acre. And then in such, turf and lawn may not be the best use for turf and lawn because of the bones and possibly having any tissue left over, depending on how your process went. And then container mix, it may not be the best for container mix unless it's been cured for a while and you have removed those bones. But we recommend no more than 33% by volume in a container. And so that was a whole lot about composting. Try to keep it as concise as possible, but I'm happy to take some questions if you folks have any.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you so much. Let me launch this poll for our live listeners. If you are in a safe place and you're not driving or riding your horse right now, we'd appreciate if you'd fill out this poll. It also will be emailed to you after. Nick, go ahead and take a drink of water or stretch for a
Good
minute.
idea.
Yeah. And also, folks, if you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A. I know I wrote down some questions. That was really great, Nick. It's really informative. It makes me think I should go turn my pile. We had a goat that we added to it a few weeks ago. So, Nick, is this photo at Highmore?
Yep, yeah, this is at Highmore. This was quite a while ago when I took this. Um, this was one of our carcass management schools, I believe. And this fencing right here is actually because sometimes we get turkeys that like to get on top of the pile and dig through the pile. And so we put this snow fencing on it to prevent them.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, some of the material we put in, I mean, of course, there's bugs that might a lot of worms that migrate to these piles, and essentially worm food. But we use like apple palmy, which is like the crushed pulp from making cider, and so
Hmm,
that's desirable to those gobblers.
neat. That also must be a pain to get that snow snow fence off.
Yeah, yeah, it can be.
Okay. So yeah, anyone, if you have any questions in the Q&A, I know I have a question. When you were talking about deep burial, and then you were talking about there is such thing as too deep. I was thinking, what is the sweet spot, if you know it off the top of your head, or if you want to go back to that slide? And I'm curious if soil type makes any difference. Or if there are considerations like if you are close to a stream or any sort of wetland area. I don't know if you know of any, if there's regulatory factors or just general considerations.
Yeah, yeah, no, those are great questions. Um, how deep is too deep? I don't really know the answer to that. There is another thing called above ground burial. Above ground burial, shallow burial with composting, or trench composting all means the same thing, just depending on which state you're in, you may be able to use one or the other because of the terminology, even though that sounds silly. But essentially it's like a foot or yeah, maybe it's like a 2 foot deep hole that you dig and then you essentially build a compost pile like in a trench. That has the ability from there's been some research on it. It has the ability to transfuse some of the oxygen in there. But it takes a lot longer than a compost pile, so they're reducing them. And so I would say if you get deeper than that, it's deep burial is just burial. And I think you're going to limit the oxygen. The soil question is really interesting, and I've never had anybody ask me that. I don't know if there is. I mean, in a coarser textured soil, you would think you would have more pore space, but I think even below 2 feet deep, I don't know if you're going to get any more or enough oxygen to facilitate the microbes. And there are setbacks, so here, this is from Iowa, and if you see this picture, it says 2 foot minimum, and that's to the soil water line. Um, I don't know if Maine has a minimum depth to the water table, um, or a minimum distance from a wellhead or a stream or something like that. But it is a great question in terms of burial. Obviously, if you're digging a hole and it's filling up with water, that's a bad place to put it. If you have, if you are in that other category where you're not exempt from all this, so if you're composting more and or burying more because you have more mortality, and you reach out to the state, they're going to go through a management plan with you, and they're going to like walk you through that, and they will do a site assessment. Great question. Questions.
Yeah. Someone did type into the Q&A, thanking you for your presentation and did note that they did send their deceased horse, to a composting place. And I know there is a place in Maine that will take horses, and you were probably familiar, with that. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. There's and as extension employees, we're not supposed to promote one business over the other, but there's two businesses I know of that take livestock, and I'm happy to mention both of them, and we work with both of them. So one is Campbell's Composting in Litchfield. Tom does a lot of routine mortality for larger commercial farms, but he does everything. I mean, I think he's taken whales and dolphins and all sorts of stuff. And then Compassionate Composting now in Durham um, offers composting, but also has it does it less to create compost and more as like kind of like end of life means for animals. So like she's a horse lover herself. They both do a great job. And so if you are interested in composting but not doing it yourself, yeah, please reach out to one of them. They're both great businesses and people.
Yeah, it's great that there are resources out there for folks to have that option.
Yeah, and those two they travel.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so they'll pick up the animal.
Yeah, and they'll go some distances too. Yeah.
Wow. Awesome. That's great to know. Nick, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. I think we can call that a wrap. It's like 7 o'clock here.
Great.
Yeah.
And I will say thank you all. And if you do have questions or you want PDF version of the slides, please just reach out to me or Rachel. Happy to share this information with you. If you really want to be a compost nerd, please come take the compost school. We'd be happy to have you. We do it twice a year, usually October and June, every year for the last 28 years. So hopefully we'll be doing it for 28 more.
That's a
Thank
long.
you.